Freshly baked bread, get it while it's warm.
Look at those masks.
I will give you 3 for the basket.
There is a kind of hunger that food cannot touch. You know the kind. Not the hunger of an empty stomach, not the hunger of a man who has not eaten. This is the other kind, the kind that lives in the chest, the kind that grows not when you have nothing, but when you have something and realize it is not enough. The kind that whispers, more, always more. This is a story about that hunger and about what happens when a man feeds it for so long that it becomes the only thing left of him. Listen carefully. His name was Eze Obiefune, and when this story begins, he was not yet a monster. That is the most important thing to understand. He was not born cruel. He was not born greedy. He was born the same way every child is born, hungry for warmth, reaching for light, wanting to be loved and safe and seen. But somewhere between that child and the man he became, something went wrong. Eze Obiefune was the chief of Idu, a village of 600 people that sat at the crossroads of 2 trade routes in the deep interior. Because of its position, Idu was prosperous. Traders passed through, markets were frequent, the land was good, and the rains came reliably, and the people of Idu had, for several generations, lived well. When Obiefune inherited the chieftaincy from his father at the age of 32, he inherited a village that was already thriving. A wiser man would have seen this as a gift. Obiefune saw it as a starting point. In his first year as chief, he introduced new taxes on the traders who passed through. Not large taxes, not obviously cruel ones, small enough that no one could reasonably complain, small enough that he could point to the roads he had repaired, the walls he had reinforced, the new market structure he had built, and say, this is where your money went. And it was true. Some of it. The rest went into the chief's compound, into finer cloth, into more wives, into a storehouse that grew heavier every season. By the 3rd year, the taxes were larger. By the 5th year, they were larger still, and the justifications became more creative. A tax on fishing rights along the river that ran through the village's land. A tax on marriages. Every family that celebrated a wedding owed the chief a portion of the bride price. A tax on the first harvest of every new farm to fund, Obiefune always had a reason, to fund whatever needed funding that season. The people of Idu grumbled, but they did not resist. Because this is the thing about power that accumulates slowly. It is very difficult to point to the exact moment it became too much. Each step seems small, each justification seems almost reasonable, and by the time it is clearly wrong, the man holding the power has enough that resistance feels dangerous. Obiefune knew this. He was not a stupid man. He was a very intelligent man who had decided to use his intelligence entirely in the service of his own accumulation. By the 10th year of his reign, Obiefune was the wealthiest man in the region. And he was not satisfied. He sat in his compound, surrounded by more than he could ever use, and felt the hunger gnawing at him with exactly the same sharpness it had gnawed at him when he was a young chief with a modest treasury. More. Always more. In the 11th year, he did something that crossed a line the village had not yet seen him cross. There was an old farmer on the edge of the village. His name was Nweke. He had farmed his land for 40 years. His father had farmed it before him. It was good land, unusually good, sitting at a place where the soil was deep and dark and rich with everything crops needed. Obiefune wanted it. Not because he needed it. He had more land than he could farm. He wanted it because it was the best piece of land within a day's walk, and it did not belong to him. And anything that did not belong to him felt like an offense. He called Nweke to his compound. he told him the land was being requisitioned for a new community granary. Nweke asked where the granary would be built. Obiefune said he had not decided yet. Nweke asked how his family would survive without their land. Obiefune offered him a sum of money that was 1/5 of what the land was worth. Nweke refused. And here is where the chief showed the village something they had been choosing not to see. He took the land anyway. Not through force, not through violence, through paperwork, through proclamations, through the slow grinding machinery of a power that had been building for 11 years and was now large enough to simply take what it wanted and call it policy. Nweke and his family were moved to a smaller plot on the far edge of the village. The granary was never built. The land became part of Obiefune's personal holdings. And the village of Idu looked at what had just happened and said nothing, because by now they were afraid. But fear, as you will learn, does not last forever, and neither does the silence it produces. There was a man in the village named Chukwemeka. He was a blacksmith, not wealthy, not powerful, not the kind of man that chiefs typically noticed or worried. But Chukwemeka had watched Nweke lose his land, and he had watched the village go silent. And something in him, some stubborn, unbendable thing that had been in his family for generations, the same quality that makes good iron, the ability to be heated and beaten and shaped without breaking, refused to accept the silence. He began to talk, quietly at first, in his workshop to the men who came to him for tools, in the market to the women who noticed he was not afraid to say what everyone was thinking. He said, "This is not what a chief is for. A chief is a protector, not a collector." The word spread the way words always spread in a village, from mouth to mouth, from compound to compound, from the market to the well to the cooking fire at evening. Obiefune heard them within a week. He called Chukwemeka to the compound. He looked at the blacksmith for a long time. Then he said, "I hear you have opinions about how a chief should conduct himself." Chukwemeka met his eyes. "I have observations about what has happened to this village under your care." Obiefune smiled. It was not a warm smile. He said, "I suggest you return to your forge, blacksmith, and concern yourself with iron, and leave the business of governance to the people who understand it." Chukwemeka went back to his forge, and that night his forge burned down. No one could prove how the fire started. Everyone knew how the fire started, and the village of Idu went quieter still. But here is what Obiefune did not understand, had never understood, the thing that all men consumed by their own hunger eventually fail to understand. Silence is not the same as acceptance. And a village that has gone quiet out of fear is not a village that has given up. It is a village that is waiting. 3 months after the forge burned, Obiefune announced a new tax. This one was different from the others. This one landed on something that could not be negotiated away or quietly absorbed into the cost of living. He taxed the dead. Every family that lost a member would pay a burial fee to the chief's treasury before the funeral could proceed. Without payment, no burial. Without burial, and every person in that village understood in their bones what this meant. The spirit of the dead could not rest, could not move on, would wander. The village did not go quiet this time. The village wept. And then the village did what villages do when they have been pushed past the place where fear is stronger than grief. They went to the old woman. Her name was Lolo Adeze. She was the oldest person in Idu. She had been old when Obiefune's father was chief. She had been old when Obiefune's grandfather was chief. It was the kind of old that stops being about years and becomes something else entirely. A density of experience, a weight of having seen that makes ordinary time feel thin beside it. She lived at the far edge of the village in a compound that even Obiefune's tax collectors approached with careful feet. the village came to her in the night. All of them. 600 people moving quietly through the dark to the old woman's compound. Lolo Adeze looked at them from her doorway. She already knew why they had come. She said, "It took you long enough." She went back inside. They followed. What she told them that night, what she instructed them to do, the story does not say in full. The old stories rarely say what the wise woman instructed. They only say what happened after. What happened after was this. On the night of the next new moon, the darkest night of the month, Obiefune woke up. Not to a sound, not to a voice, to a feeling. The feeling of his compound being wrong. He sat up on his sleeping mat. The room was dark, but not the ordinary dark of a room at night. Something thicker, something with a texture that ordinary darkness does not have. He called for his guards. No one answered.
He stood. He walked to the door of his sleeping room and opened it. And what he saw in his compound stopped him in the doorway. Everything was there. All of it. All the yams in his storehouse, every piece of cloth in his treasury, every coin, every skin, every item of value that he had accumulated through 11 years of taxes and seizures and quiet cruelties. All of it was there. Arranged in the center of his compound, stacked and sorted with a neatness that was almost ceremonial. And around it, sitting in a perfect circle, filling his entire compound from wall to wall, were his people. Every person in Idu, 600 of them, sitting in absolute silence in the dark, looking at him. Not with anger, not with fear, not with the expressions of people who have come to take something or destroy something, with something worse. With grief. The grief of people who have watched someone they were supposed to trust become something they no longer recognize. Obiefune stood in his doorway for a very long time. Lolo Adeze rose from the circle. She walked toward him. She was so small, so old. She moved so slowly. And Obiefune, who had faced traders and rival chiefs and tax disputes and the 1,000 negotiations of a decade of rule, felt something he had not felt in years. He felt afraid. She stopped before him. She looked up at him with eyes that had seen everything this village had been through. And she said, "Look." Just that. One word. Look. He looked. He looked at the pile of accumulated wealth in the center of his compound. He looked at the 600 faces surrounding it. He looked at old Nweke, sitting in the circle, the farmer whose land he had taken. He looked at Chukwemeke, the blacksmith, who had rebuilt his forge with his own hands and the help of neighbors, and who sat now with burned scars on his forearms that were not there a year ago. He looked at the children of Idu, sitting in the circle with their parents, looking at their chief with eyes that did not yet have words for what they were seeing, but that were learning right now, tonight, a lesson about power and hunger and what happens when a man stops protecting the people he was given and starts consuming them instead. He looked, and Lolo Adeze said, "This is everything you took. We brought it back to you. You may keep it. Every piece of it. It is yours." Obiefune stared at her. "But understand something," she said. "From this night, you keep it alone. We will not pay another tax. We will not bring another tribute. We will not consult you before a market or a marriage or a burial. We will not call you chief. We will farm our land
and fish our river and bury our dead and raise our children, and we will do all of it as if you are not here. You will live in this village as a man who has things, not as a chief, not as a leader, not as anything that any person in this village recognizes or respects." She looked at him. "You chose the things over the people." She said it simply, without cruelty, like a woman stating a fact. "So you will have the things, and you will not have the people. And you will live long enough to understand the difference." She turned around. She walked back to her place in the circle, and one by one, 600 people stood up and walked out of his compound and left him there, alone, with everything. Obiefune lived for 19 more years. He lived in a village of 600 people, and he was invisible to every one of them. Not shunned dramatically, not cursed or spat upon, simply not seen. Men walked past him without greeting him. Women did not bring him food. Children did not play near his compound. The market operated without him. The disputes were settled without him. The births and deaths and weddings and harvests all continued in the full living rhythm of a community that had decided he was not part of it. He had his storehouse. He ate alone. He sat in his compound surrounded by more than any man in the region owned. And he felt it. For the first time in his life, he felt it clearly, the thing that all the accumulation had been trying to fill. Not wealth, not power, not security. He had wanted to matter. He had wanted to be the center of something, to be necessary, to be the person that his 600 people oriented themselves around, the way a village orients itself around a chief who is truly serving it. He had wanted to belong. And in his hunger for more, in his endless feeding of that gnawing thing in his chest, he had consumed the very thing he had actually been hungry for. He died on a Thursday in the dry season, alone in his compound. Eze came to look at him after he was gone. She stood in the doorway of his sleeping room for a long time. Then she said something that the young woman who had come with her, her granddaughter, who would tell this story for the rest of her long life, never forgot. She said, "He was not a bad man who became a chief. He was a hungry man who looked at himself clearly and early enough to choose." The granddaughter looked at her. "Is there a difference?" she asked. Eze looked at her. "All the difference in the world," she said. "A bad man cannot be saved. A hungry man, if he looks at himself clearly and early enough, can choose." She looked at the compound full of things. He just never looked until it was too late to choose. They buried him on the edge of the village. The storehouse was divided among the families he had taxed. Nueke's land was returned to Nueke's children, and the village of Idu went on, prosperous, alive, governed by a council of elders that included Chukwuemeka the blacksmith, who turned out to have very good instincts for fairness. And the story was told, every generation, to every child who would one day hold any kind of power over any kind of people, with the same instruction every time. Look at what the hunger is actually for before the hunger looks at everything else first. This has been the story of the greedy chief who lost everything. He did not lose it all at once. He lost it one choice at a time.